Hi, everybody, again, and welcome. This is the Civil Society Action Committee webinar for non-civil society partners, member states, UN agencies, and others. We're going to be walking through our current civil society models of engagement process very shortly. Just waiting for a couple more people to join in, and then we'll begin very soon. For those of you who've signed on through the GoToMeeting connection, you'll be able to see that we'll be sharing a document that we'll be walking through, a very short document about 4 pages long, and that can also be found on our website, which we'll paste in the chat box very soon. So yeah, we've just shared the link to the website, and I think we'll go ahead and get started now, if that's okay with everybody. Just a reminder, please, to keep your microphones muted. If you're using the GoToMeeting, it's that little green button with a microphone on it. If you just click it, it should turn to orange, and that'll show that you're muted. But thank you for coming in. Just feel free to jump in at any time. Just unmute yourself and ask questions or make a comment. Welcome to do that. And for those of you on the phone, also please ask that you also keep your phones muted from your end as well to minimize the background noise. So anyway, yeah, welcome again. This is the Civil Society Action Committee. We'll be walking through this process that we are engaged in right now. But just want to give a quick introduction. You'll see that in the document there is a short introduction about how the Civil Society Action Committee has come about. We were founded in 2016 by civil society groups to address the high-level summit, a way for civil society to self-organize various inputs and various points of coordination for civil society to engage in the high-level summit and the events around that. And in 2017 and 2018, the Action Committee agreed to then extend its mandate to focus on the Global Compact for Migration, the GCM, primarily, as well as looking at bridging advocacy around the GCR, the Global Compact for Refugees, looking at issues of coherence and complementarity. Following the adoption of the GCM, the Migration Compact in Marrakesh last year, we all then began looking at implementation from this year onwards. And within that, the Action Committee members agreed that we would extend our mandate into 2019 only for this year to review, first of all, review what's going on around implementation and to keep track of that, to engage civil society at large around implementation, and to offer as much information as possible around it, what's the new developments around that, but also to then look and see how we should organize ourselves as civil society in this new era, quote-unquote, era of global migration governance that we find ourselves in, post-Marrakesh and post-GCM adoption. So we've agreed to extend, our mandate for this year, keeping track of the implementation work and focusing on that, but also keeping a bridging role to the Global Compact on Refugees and internally displaced people's work program for 2020. But at the same time, as we mentioned, we're also looking to develop this new model of civil society engagement. And to prepare for this, we undertook an extensive consultation process. We hired a consultant, and the consultant did an extensive review with civil society leaders around the world, as well as a few focus groups, regional focus groups, and 2 what we call green room, which are also sort of big focus groups during the GFMD Civil Society Days, 2 green room sessions at the CSD in Marrakesh last year. And what we're going to go through now is the outcome of that series of consultations that the consultant reported on, which focus on three aspects: objectives for the new model that we'd like to move towards, proposed structure, or at least some elements of key elements of the structure for that, and a roadmap for a process this year that will take us through the rest of the year. And with the understanding that by the end of the year, we will then, evolve into this new model of engagement based on these extensive consultations with civil society. But I want to say also here that not just civil society that we want to consult with on this, and that's why we're offering this webinar to all of you. We also want to look very carefully at how we can be the best partners possible in the Global Compact for Migration's implementation with member states, with UN agencies, with other non-civil society partners, the private sector, academia, and many others. So we will be, this is the first start of that, offering this webinar, but also we'll be talking to you in many other contexts as well. We'll have follow-up webinars on this as well, and we'll also be discussing this with you bilaterally in many contexts. And then finally, in the introduction, just to mention that we have a dedicated website. You'll see it here, and you'll also see it posted in the chat box. It's csengagement.org, CS as in civil society, engagement.org. If you click on that, it gives you an extensive, I don't know if you actually can see this, but it'll give you an extensive review of what the process is, a full introduction, all the resources you'll need. We have 4 versions of this document that we're walking through. We have it in Arabic, French, English, and Spanish. And then we also have the full report by the consultant, which is about 40-some pages long, a PowerPoint presentation. And we have recently done an open civil society focused webinar similar to this, and then you'll find a YouTube link for that at the bottom of the page for that. And then you'll also find a roadmap, which we'll be going through in a little while on that. Anyway, so that's the website and what that covers. Let me pause there before we jump into the objectives and see if anybody has any questions about the action committee, how it's come about, what this process is so far. Anyone has that at this point? Or any comments? Yeah, okay, great. Hearing none, we'll go ahead and continue with the objectives that has been proposed. So one thing to underline here is that these are proposed objectives by the consultant to us, to civil society, on what we should focus on in sort of developing and evolving this new model from the Action Committee. These are not the final ones. In fact, we've already gotten quite a lot of feedback extensively around this. We've done somewhere around 30 or so bilateral in-person or conference call meetings with key civil society organizations, both within our membership as well as other key civil society partners that we work with closely. We've done about 3 or 4 large civil society webinars and conference calls, discussion on this. And we'll be doing a lot more discussions in many other contexts as we move along this process. But up to this point, we're in the last 2 months, 2.5 months, actually almost 3 months since the report was launched by the consultant. We've got a lot of feedback on all of these objectives. So it's really what we are presenting now is really the consultant's recommendations. And I'll also go through some of the feedback we've gotten so far. 3 primary objectives to focus on. The consultant calls it the 3 C's. The very first one is around information and communications. It's really focused on having this new model be a knowledge hub for civil society, and the understanding is it's not where we in the Secretariat would actually have all the information, but the idea that we would be a space where information is widely shared among civil society and everybody who has with the understanding that everybody has different pieces of information at all levels, whether it's the national, regional, or global level, whether it's specific to particular thematic areas and particular objectives of the Global Compact um, and whatnot, and all of that can be then shared within this space, and we can connect and can communicate with each other based on that information sharing and based on that knowledge sharing. So this is really one of the key aspects, the cornerstone of the, in fact, the cornerstone of what we do already, but really to re-emphasize that and be really absolutely clear about what that is. The understanding is that everything else flows from this, and these are cumulative. We can't do number two without doing number one first. So this is the first and foremost thing that we will be engaging in. The second thing is around collective organizing. And here the understanding is that once we are fully informed, then we might at some points as civil society find it necessary to take certain joint positions together, joint advocacy inputs, joint statements collectively. This is not to say, and it is really important to emphasize, is really not to say that we will be comprehensively covering all of civil society in the world. It's virtually impossible because of the breadth of civil society and the diversity of civil society. But we really understand there is certainly a core that stands together on certain issues at a very baseline level. And in that sense, it's very good for us to sort of convene that position, help to coordinate and help to facilitate that, and also help to really refine that together collectively, and then speak on that. It is also important to emphasize here, this is, and we've really been doing that a lot throughout, especially around the negotiations last year and key moments around stock-taking meeting, around the Marrakesh conference, when civil society came up with joint statements. Even though the Action Committee played the central role in terms of facilitating those to happen and coordinating civil society's convening, coming together and deliberating that, and coming up with a joint statement, it's really important to emphasize that it wasn't, if we don't speak with it from a quote-unquote Action Committee voice, this is really a joint civil society voice, and in many cases, when we find it necessary, we have sign-ons to that, anywhere between 80 to 150, 170 organizations sometimes, who sign on widely at a variety of levels, national, regional, global levels, who sign into those statements. This is really to emphasize that on these positions and on these statements, this is where we come together, this is where we stand together on these. And we feel that's really important. I'm sure you've seen that, for example, with member states kind of taking joint positions during negotiations and elsewhere. It's really, really an important piece, and it helps us really refine what's at the core of that. And I think it really helps us to, as civil society, come forward with some of the baseline recommendations and inputs and outcomes from different processes to show that this is where at least a wide range of civil society has been consulted and has given inputs into this. But again, to emphasize, it's not completely 100%, comprehensive. It is, but at least to an effort to try to find cohesion and symmetry and alignment around some key civil society organization and civil society leaders around that. And again, this builds on the information. We cannot engage in number two without fully being informed in number one and being properly informed. So the information comes first, and then there's sort of facilitation and convening for joint positions and joint actions, so to speak. And then the third one is builds on number one and number two as well, and that's around building capacity. This has been gotten quite a lot of feedback already. I think we want to refine this by saying that it's around creating access. The understanding here, the basic understanding here is that civil society operates in many different levels and has a wide range of capacity and resources at its disposal. Civil society organizations have. Some are very grassroots, volunteer organizations, associations, groups of migrants coming together, or diaspora coming together,
in a very voluntary way to find a way to speak for itself. Others are large international NGOs with extensive offices around the world and with a lot of resources at disposal. And the understanding is to try and create access to try to address the gaps in that engagement. Certainly understanding that engagement in the Global Compact implementation is really necessary at all levels to have that full 360 view that has always been called for by member states and everybody else throughout the GCM process. So the understanding here is really about creating access and supporting that in many ways. You'll find in the report and summarized here that the consultant suggests that we might even build capacity at the national and regional level by also building embryonic networks and sort of building nascent organizations at that level where there aren't any or where there needs to be addressed. That has been summarily sort of pushed back on by a lot of civil society, particularly those at the national and regional level, saying that it's not that these don't exist, and again, it's not that they don't have the intellectual capacity to be engaged on that. A lot of times it's about the access for that, the information at the first and foremost, getting the information about what's happening, where is it happening, and what's it around, and how can we give our input on that. That's really the key aspect of it. And then also, how can we then participate in that? And I think those are the things that we want to kind of refine in this objective. The final thing to say about all three objectives, you'll see in this little box at the bottom here, is that it's really about this future model, as we call it, about connecting and finding a space where civil society can come together. So the emphasis here is on facilitation and not that this body, which is now the Action Committee and what we are calling the future model, it will, even as we evolve, this body won't be the singular voice for all of civil society, but we will convene, we will facilitate, we will help to engage civil society as widely as possible to find some baseline understanding and information, sharing of information widely, and also take positions together when it's necessary and when we think it's important. But that will be decided by the members of the future model, by civil society at large. It's really around playing the coordination and facilitation function more than anything else, and really recognizing that civil society is extremely, extremely diverse at many different levels. Let me pause here for a second around these objectives to see if there's any questions or comments, and we'd particularly like to hear your inputs and your take on this. Anyone? Good. Okay. Well, maybe no questions so far. We'll then continue, but feel free to jump in at any time. Just unmute yourself and feel free to jump in. Based on this so far, as we said, we've done some extensive reviews of this, extensive consultations of this at many different levels. We've held now around 5 regional consultations based on this as well. With, as I mentioned before, we've translated this document into 3 other languages as well: Arabic, French, and Spanish. We've done it in different time zones, and we've got one more regional consultation coming up on this in the Pacific next week, and that will sort of conclude this. But we've really gotten a lot of feedback on this, and I think I've communicated this so far. That's what we've done up to this point, really the end of April. From May onwards, we're going to be looking more in depth into this 3rd page here, which is the proposed structure for this future model and how we should evolve into. Just to say now that how it currently exists, the Civil Society Action Committee has a membership of about 30-some organizations, and we'll show that to you again in a second. Actually, let's see if I can
do that right now. You'll find that in the yeah, sorry, just moving around my screen here. So you'll find that we have a this website, the csengagement.org. And if you scroll down through the website, you'll find that it sort of describes all of this. But we also have a separate website, which is called, unfortunately for now, madenetwork.org/civil-society-action-committee. And this is the page, and we'll share that link in a moment here. But underneath here, you'll actually find a list of all the members that we have right now, right at the bottom of that page. So I just wanted to make sure that we share that with you. And that's where our current membership is, and where it stands right now. That structure is very simple and very light, and it really, the other elements of the structure is that besides the membership, we have 3 co-conveners, the 3 originators of the Action Committee, which is ICMC, International Catholic Migration Commission, ICVA, the International Committee of Voluntary Agencies, and the NGO Committee on Migration based in New York. And these 3 co-conveners sort of provides the function of an executive body for the current Action Committee. And the Action Committee is housed within ICMC itself. That's where we have our officers and where we work out of, and have direct reporting and all functions within ICMC. What has been proposed by the consultant in her series of interviews and all that is that we should also move towards a little bit more structure in that, and involve that structure as well. And this is her recommendations on how we move towards that. That we retain some sort of executive board, that this be elected for 2-year terms, but 5 or 6 organizations, and this would have executive oversight and decision making, sort of the day-to-day management and leading of the entire committee and the secretariat. And then we have a steering committee, and the steering committee here is very interesting proposal. It's to see that certain organizations have a representational sort of nature to it. For example, in the regions, there are certain regional networks and regional focal points within those networks. On certain thematic issues, for example, the Child Rights Initiative, we have 2 sort of co-leaders and co-initiators of that process, Save the Children and the others. So, for example, those are the ones who would form a steering committee to have this broad representation, but really to focus in on strategy and decision making at a high level, and to support the executive board. And this would convene monthly. So about 20 to 30 organizations, a slightly smaller group than full membership, to be really the ones that are doing the strategic thinking and decision making for the body. And then we have a membership, and this membership would be sort of criteria based, with very, very broad ranging. And I think the idea here is to have access to a wide range of civil society at all levels, with a particular emphasis on grassroots organizations, recognizing that grassroots organizations at the local, national level, smaller organizations with little resources and capacities might not be able to have access and engage fully as everybody wants them to and as they want to. So the idea is that this membership would be open to all for that, and really be the space where we really share a lot of information. And on any decision making, especially around taking positions, different issues, the full membership will be completely consulted in doing that. And then we have a secretariat, very simply, very small 1 to 2 person secretariat to manage the functions of that. We currently have a 2-person secretariat with a
additional person seconded for about a third of the time that makes up the current secretariat, and the understanding is that that sort of number, that sort of structure would be retained and continue, with the understanding that this would be very much a membership-driven network and platform. Really, the members would be doing the bulk of the work, and the secretary really provides a coordination and facilitation function more than anything else. And then within the membership would have working groups, and working groups, again, based on the second objective that we mentioned, not just around information, but actually taking action collectively, jointly, taking positions, advocacy points on certain areas. This is really important to say that, to do that, we need a small group oftentimes to deliberate and refine that, to draft certain positions. And so the idea here is we would have sort of ad hoc working groups, which are time bound, up to around 6 months or so, focus on very, very specific areas. And the idea here is that this working group would then sort of draft positions, kind of deliberate that, hone that, refine that, but then, be sort of that with the full membership as well as civil society at large to see, for full consultation. I'll give you an example of how this has worked very recently. I believe Nyari is on the phone, on the call, so welcome Nyari. But just to also say that recently around the UN network on migration, we undertook an exercise to actually come up with a set of proposals on the UN network's priorities and key areas of work. And in that, we convened a working group initially. It actually became quite large. It was about 18 people on that working group in total, 18 or 19 people, over a period of about 3 or 4 weeks to really refine some sets of proposals and really deliberate that and come up with some of the best ideas for that collectively and jointly. We then shared what we came up with as a draft to about 80 to 100 organizations who are close to us in terms of both our membership and key partners that we've been working with over the last few years around the Global Compact, and got further feedback and inputs and refined that further before we came up with a final draft that we then submitted to the UN network. So we went through this extensive process that was really kind of led by this, we called it a drafting team working group, and it was really ad hoc. That group will convene again this Friday as a follow-up to the UN network's consultation with civil society, and we'll kind of deliberate on next steps. And really, we see that group to be fulfilling its functions within the next month or so, once we've kind of completed the follow-up points of that. So it's really time-bound, really short. It would be probably about 3 months where it has its life. It's ad hoc, and it's voluntary. Anybody could have joined at any point in time. In a very similar way, we're doing something similar towards the IMRF modalities to come up with joint collective civil society inputs on that. And certainly this is, again, never to replace and never to be an overarching sort of position on everybody else, but really to say that on certain things we have some common understandings, and everybody within our membership or outside our membership, any other organization can definitely produce their own inputs, and we strongly encourage them to do. We see that certain specific regional groups and thematic focus initiatives might have much more to say about their particular area of expertise. In the regions, we'll find that regional groups and those at that level, at the national level, have particular things to talk about in the conditions that they're facing in their region, and they'll want to explore that much further on thematic areas. Similarly, they might explore on certain areas. But this working group would really look much more broadly, globally speaking, and try to kind of at least the baselines of where joint civil society's thinking and understanding is at this point. That's how the structure works. And again, to go back then, that all feeds back is coordinated by a small secretariat and facilitated by that. We really play a mostly facilitation role, helping everybody get together and convening calls and conference calls and meetings and briefings, preparatory meetings, all of that. We really facilitate that, but it be then driven by the full membership through the working groups, and then overall would have monthly steering committee that kind of looks at that and where we go and takes those broad strategic thinking and decision making at that level, and driven by an executive board. I just want to say now that the feedback so far, which is very nascent and initial at this point, the feedback so far is that this structure might actually be a little bit heavy for something that what civil society needs and wants for this. And I think we would love to hear your feedback as well, from the UN agencies, from member states, about what makes sense for this. Would you like to see civil society be much more flexible and much more engaged in that sense, or something much more structured? The feedback is that, currently the action committee as it stands, as I described earlier, is very simple and very light. It's very membership driven, and the full membership engages in our monthly calls. Different members will engage in different working groups and different actions and programs and activities as they feel it's necessary, as they feel relates to their immediate work. And the co-conveners meets also maybe every 2 months and is responsive to the Secretariat, and the Secretariat runs the day-to-day coordination and facilitation functions. And everybody's feedbacks that it sort of works. What needs to be maybe refined a little bit more is how the membership is structured, and having that a little bit more open. Actually, that's called for it to be much more open, and also to have a little bit of criteria. Currently, we don't have a set of criteria, except saying that we're willing to engage with any civil society organization that wants to engage around the global compact, especially on global governance of migration in general. So that's to say that we're really excited to get feedback. But over the next 3 months, we'll actually, and I'll describe the roadmap in a second after this, but over the next 3 months, the next step from May to June, we'll actually be convening a series of action committee members calls on this specifically to look at the structure, to really focus in and kind of deliberate that collectively. But let me pause here for a second to see if there's any comments or questions around this, about the structure, or if you'd like to go back even, about the objectives that we described earlier. So let me take anybody at this point. No? Okay, great.
Hey, Colin, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, it's Denise
Hi.
Gillian from West. Hi. I'm just, maybe if you could just speak to whether there is also any effort around coordination on the regional level. You mentioned 5 regional consultations. Is that kind of a structure which is also persisting sort of underneath this more global focus?
Yeah, so first, we would never say that it's underneath this global structure, but yeah, certainly at the regional level, there have been a number of different regional networks that have formed, and these range from those that are about 20 years old to those that have just been created around the global compact. We currently have 7 regional networks and focal points for the Pacific, Asia, MENA, Africa, Europe, North America, which is primarily US and Canada, and Latin America and the Caribbean. So these 7 sort of regional networks and their partners and their members and all of them sort of work at those levels. And just again to suggest that each of these regional networks have emerged or have been founded and been created around very different circumstances. They are very different in both their capacities and engagement, and obviously in their subject matter. Each region has its own specificities and own uniqueness and issues that it grapples and deals with, and challenges as well as opportunities that it has on hand. So each regional network is organized differently. But those 7 regions, and it's not just those 7 regional networks, there are others also working in those regions that have, that's part of our membership. And on specific things related to the regions, we always defer to them first and foremost. I'll give you 2 quick examples of this. As I keep going back to this, in our recent recommendations to the UN network, we had some things to say about the Northern Triangle, Central America, North America corridor. And we have, for example, a regional network called the Bloque Latinoamérica, as well as many other of our members who work in that region. And so and not just our members, but beyond the current membership of the Action Committee, other close partners and others who work in that region, who then, a number of them were part of the drafting team and took that part of the recommendations and really developed that and gave a lot of really detailed information about that piece of the recommendations. And then some even undertook their own positions and submitted them independently on their own. And of course, like I said, we encourage them to do so. So, there are regional networks that take the lead in that. This coming week, or at the end of this Saturday, actually, Bangladesh has called for a regional consultation on the GCM implementation as well as IMRF modalities in Dhaka, a one-day regional consultation. And it's opened up that regional consultation to civil society as well. So the civil society engagement in that consultation is being led by one of our main regional members, Migrant Forum in Asia, MFA, many people know of. So they are leading that. They're actually doing a half-day pre-consultation briefing for their membership and other civil society in the region who will be participating. Mostly, I would say, at this point, mostly Bangladesh-based organizations and those working in Bangladesh. And they'll be briefing. And they've asked us, from the Secretariat to also support that briefing and offer some inputs into that. But really, it's being led by them, and a lot of the positions undertaken during the consultation will be led by them. So yes, we do have these sort of regional formations, and but each is very, very different from the other and have come about in many different ways. I mentioned 2 of them. The Latin America Bloque Latin America actually came about towards the high-level summit, and then the Pacific Network, which is actually housed within PIANGO, the Pacific Island Alliance of NGOs. PIANGO has been around a very long time, but works on a wide range of issues, including climate and land and environment and all that, development, but has really taken a focus on migration as well within that context, and actually came about during the consultation phase of the GCM in 2017. They will help co-organize the regional civil society consultation in the region and in Fiji, and from there sort of launch a working group, which is being led by PACWIN, which is the Pacific Women in Migration Network. So that's housed within PIANGO. So it's very new, it's very nascent, it's very voluntary run and based. And as I mentioned also, in this process of our models of engagement, we've actually been going through sort of 5 of these, at least regionally. So we've had these calls convened at different time zones and at least 3 other languages as well. We had a meeting, forgetting now, I believe it was in Istanbul recently, for the MENA region that was conducted in Arabic. We had about 3 or 4 weeks ago a consultation for Latin America, which was undertaken in Spanish. And then we had an Africa consultation last week, I believe it was, and we did that in 2 languages, in English and French. And so, and we had a lot of these members of these networks convened at that level. So I think a lot of times when we look at the regional and national levels, we will defer that to our regional networks in our membership, those 7, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Any other questions or comments on any of these?
Lynn, can you hear
Great.
me?
Yes.
So this is Iben Willumsen from the EU delegation in Geneva. Just a quick question. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on the relation between ICRA and also this model that you foresee? Have you gotten any input from ICRA, and how do you see the relation and the complementarity and possibly the structure and relation between the two structures? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think and that comes up a lot. I'll just kind of if you can see my screen, I hope you can see my screen. But as I scroll back to the introduction page, in introduction, we talk about it being convened in 2016, and that's how the Action Committee came about. And the three co-conveners, the three networks that kind of founded and created the Action Committee initially was ICMC, ICFA, and the NGO Committee on Migration in New York. So ICFA was very much a part of that. In fact, the original Action Committee consisted of 10 civil society organizations from the GFM, the Civil Society Days International Steering Committee. We had a subcommittee called the Strategy and Planning Committee, and that was typically referred to as the core group. And so we had 10 organizations there, and then 10 organizations from ICFA's, I believe it was its steering committee, that formed the 20 in the original Action Committee in the early days of 2016 in the lead up to the high-level summit. So ICFA continues to play that co-convener role. It's one of the three organizations that sort of forms our sort of de facto executive body for the current Action Committee. And in fact, we've just been talking about this just last Friday, and with the co-conveners, with ICFA and ICMC and the NGO Committee focused on that. So ICFA is definitely one of the members currently, and a very active member, and plays a very close role in terms of supporting our work, even at the executive level, in terms of helping guide the Secretariat and overseeing the Secretariat. And certainly one of those that hired me in this position and oversees the staff as well. So ICFA also plays the bridging, probably the most important one in playing the bridging function. So one of the things we mentioned throughout last year, or the last 2 years, when we were focused on the GCM, we also kept a bridging role into looking at the development of the GCR to ensure complementarity and coherence. And ICFA was not just ICFA, obviously, and we have a number of other organizations that are very active, were very active in the GCR and has been very active in the GCR implementation as well. But ICFA really kind of led that and looking at issues of coherence and complementarity, really undertaking some of the key points and making sure that any kind of inputs that we were saying on either end were synonymous with each other. We had sort of similar baselines. It didn't make sense to have different levels that we were advocating on either compact. So we want to make sure that at least we were saying the same things, even if the eventual text of both compacts might have had differences in that. And I can't point to any particular thing right now, but at least from the civil society end, we were very, very clear that we were very coherent in that. And this is, ICFA really kind of utilized the Action Committee to ensure that that was happening throughout, and checking ourselves throughout all of our actions related to that. I don't see that changing at all in the new structure. And as we move forward, I think that's been very clear that ICFA and other humanitarian focused organizations will be very key in this, even if we are really focused on the Global Compact on Migrations implementation, follow-up and review, that we really feel it's very necessary to maintain a very close look and in touch with what's happening with GCR implementation, with UNHCR's sort of priorities, and including the Global Refugee Forum coming up the end of this year. So that there's a keen look at that, and ICFA and many other of our members as well. You'll see in our list of membership, many organizations that are very, very active on the GCR level as well. We'll maintain that sort of complementarity view and making sure that any positions that we take, we have a very sort of baseline coherence and synthesis with what's happening at the GCR level as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Any others on this?
Hi, Colin. This is Nyari. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, hi, Nyari.
Hi. Thank you for this invitation, and apologies. I was not able to join at the very beginning of the meeting, and I stepped in a little late because I was at another meeting. But I wanted to thank you for the invitation. And in response to your question, I just wanted to share my agreement with your point about from the offset. I mean, the structure does seem rather heavy, and I point specifically to the steering committee. I feel 20 to 30 organizations is a bit much for most structural subgroups or sub-bodies that will be part of the bigger structure. So I'm keen to understand how you came up with that number, and perhaps it's meant to serve the first objective, which I think is absolutely legitimate and will require all hands on deck to, I believe it's convene and communicate and the other C that I'm forgetting. Then my other pointer was really to encourage you to think also about how the new model will connect in very practically to action on the ground. I know this is one of often, even in our own work, the Achilles heel of, coordination or initiatives on, especially on migration. We don't think enough about the impact and what needs that are at the local level and at the national level, and entities and organizations that are working at that level need specific types of support, and just to be mindful of that. And then my last point was really an invitation to engage with the different network members as well. There is value in engaging with the network as a collective, but I also think because the network is really meant to complement and not compete with existing work and initiatives, there is also value to be had by engaging with individual network members that have different actions and priorities on different parts of the GCM implementation review and follow-up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nyari. That's really, really helpful and very welcome. And I think you more than anybody else really understands and appreciates, the nature of organizing something like this in terms of coordination. And I think perhaps you're going through many similar things and grappling very similar questions. So that your inputs are really, really.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think you're absolutely right about the heaviness of the proposed structure. And I think this, again, just underline that these are recommendations from the consultant as of February of this year, and based on her extensive, consultations with civil society from really began around October or November of last year, right through Marrakesh and right through the beginning of this year. And I think one of the key things in her discussions, what she found was that people were asking for more transparency and more accountability in terms of decision making and all of that. And also what we had in practice, at least particularly in 2018, during the negotiation phase, there was a sort of interaction ongoing with IOM in particular. And I think this was particularly because it became clear right from the zero draft of the GCM tax that IOM's role would be particularly important. It was really being indicated in the zero draft and became refined much more in the final text, and throughout the member states consistently emphasized that. And in that sense, civil society recognized that it was important to really engage right from the start of 2018 with IOM around even looking at implementation. And similarly on IOM side, and I know in my previous role in sort of supporting IOM in that as well, we really also was really keen to look at how we can get civil society to give inputs into what civil society's engagement in the implementation stage would look like. And in that, there were a couple of convenings where representatives of different, sort of sectors and regions and all that came together in specific meetings. This was not to say it was only limited to those people. It was certainly very open, and all of them were asked to sort of really bring forward the inputs from their membership and their partners much more widely. So in that sense, it was very helpful to have 20, 25 people in a room to really go deep into something and grapple and spend a day kind of rolling up our sleeves and working on what are different models of engagement that exist in the UN system at large, and what works, what doesn't work, kind of really going through that. And that was helpful in that respect at that point in time. And I think the consultant maybe took that and said, well, maybe something like that could work within the structure. But I think we've already gotten feedback at this point to say that, well, that's, first of all, there are two big questions that comes up. 20 to 30 is quite a large number for a steering committee for membership that currently is only around 30 plus. And even as we know, we'll probably grow significantly when we reopen for membership. Even that, it's still a large steering committee. But the second thing is that who's this steering committee? Who's selecting them, and how are they chosen? What kind of mandate do they have? What's their term limit? All of that is not really explored in the report. So I think those some of the questions will actually go deeper and dive in a little bit more right now in this next 3 months. But I think that's really well taken, that it probably is too heavy as what's proposed already. On your second point, yes, I think we really are keenly aware that access to engagement, especially from the local, national levels, is very, very challenging. And that's one of the things, going back to the third objective, is really the important part of how we refine that. And I think we really, as I mentioned, we've already gotten some feedback on refining that third point and really clarifying that. And maybe not so much about actively setting up new networks or providing resources or capacity, which we ourselves are very stretched in, but really about providing access, creating a space where information can be shared, being very open about that and very, very accessible about that, and also being able to engage, even if you're a small volunteer-run organization in a town, that is that possibility to engage at a very basic level. And I think one of the other things is also connecting them with existing infrastructure. There are, as we mentioned, at least 7, and definitely more than 7. Asia, for example, we have 2 networks on the refugee side and on the migration side, 2 very well developed, very active networks of civil society. So there are sometimes multiple networks that you can already be part of and connected to that actually do much more support on the ground with grassroots national level organizations. So we want to support those infrastructure that exist, and definitely keenly aware not to undermine those at any point in time, but actually support their growth and development as well. So that helps global civil society at large. So we really are keenly aware about that. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We have been, both from our secretariat side, trying to also engage with different members, at least starting with the network's executive committee, and meeting with them. But our membership, the civil society membership, which is very broad and very diverse, also has particular sort of focus in terms of their work in thematic areas. And in that, they also have particular agency partners that they work with very closely. So, I mentioned the Child Rights Initiative, which works extremely close with UNICEF. I believe UNICEF is part of the Child Rights Initiative. So they are constantly talking with Verena in New York, and in fact, a lot of inputs that they get and information that they get is from the UNICEF side. Others, for example, the human rights one might work very closely with OHCHR, and so on and so forth. There are many that have really direct relationships, already existing relationships with different agencies, and will constantly be doing that, and we support and we encourage that. And I think that goes back to objective 1 in what we are as a platform, is that the information and the engagement that they already have and they continue to develop with specific agencies within the UN network, that they bring that forward into this information sharing, into this knowledge hub that we are and that we will be. And I think that's where we can have the broad range of information of what different positions or different views different agencies have and what their focus is and where they're moving towards, and engage them directly in terms of how we proceed with certain positions and actions that we want to take on as well. For example, in one of the recent discussions with the UN network, we also talked about engaging at the regional level, and I think that's already some of our regional members have already undertaken that, with talking with ILO and IOM officers in the regions, having discussions with them. What would that look like? Implementation at the regional level. How can we do that together collectively, as well as member states, of course, and their ongoing relationship with capitals in the region. So yeah, I think we're definitely doing that, and I think that's very good instruction and guidance on how we can also focus, our future work going forward from there. Anyone else at this juncture? Well, thank you. If not, I'll kind of move on to the final section in this, and this is just underlining the roadmap for our process and where we are and where we want to get to by January 1st, 2020. So just to recap at what I said at the start, at the end of last year, towards when we were leading up towards Marrakesh, the Action Committee's existing membership then took a couple of decisions. One, it said, yes, we want to extend the mandate for the Action Committee into 2019, but really just let's continue what we're doing right now, which is really, in many ways, Objective 1 and Objective 2, sharing information and undertaking joint positions together when it's necessary. Let's continue doing that into 2019 as implementations of the Global Compact starts to unfold. But secondly, let's also undertake this process. And so that was the second decision, to kind of go through this process to 2019, with the view that by the end of 2019 and the start on January 1st, 2020, we will evolve into this new model. Now, it's really an evolutionary sort of process. It's not really, I don't think anybody has ever asked for, completely, destructuring what we have right now and recreating something new. But everybody feels we have a lot of good things going already, and not to really throw that out, but really to build on what we have and build on that and make it better and make it more fit for purpose in this new era. That's the really important thing. We understand that the environment has changed significantly and will continue to change and evolve, and we need to also be fit and ready for that. And so from the civil society and being able to do that. And in that, the report that that the consultant did, which we're going through right now, is the first stage of that. As I mentioned, we finalized that report in February. You see that was the stage 1 and was presented to us in February. And we also did a meeting in New York during Migration Week in New York that month to really look at this quite in depth. We're going through right now, and we're at the end of this, over March and April, an extensive series of report presentations and consultation. And you'll see in stage 3, we're also presenting this to many of you, member states, UN agencies, funders and donors, and other partners, non-civil society partners in the private sector and academia and elsewhere. And that's what we're doing. Sorry, this didn't say early April, it should say like late April and early May. But this is really at the end of this process of the report. So stage 1, 2, and 3 is really around the consultant's report. From here on, we'll move beyond the report. We'll actually, from May to July, we'll look at stage 2 and stage 2. And really stage 2 is about looking much more in depth into the structure. I think we've got really good feedback on the objectives. We're going to refine that. We'll, of course, reconsult on the objectives, but then to take a deeper dive into the structure and talk about that much more. And your feedback already has been very helpful, and we'll do that a lot with civil society in the next 3 months. When we come back from the summer, at least the Northern Hemisphere summer holidays, we'll actually do a conceptualize conceptualization process, and in that we'll actually come up with a sort of a pilot of the future model, and that will happen between August and October. And by the end of October, we hope to have that fully drafted and fully already in place. So actually, somewhere around this time, one of the decisions that the Action Committee also took at the end of last year was to freeze our membership. The idea is that we don't want people to be joining if we don't know what they're joining into. So let's go through this process first and then reopen up for membership. And actually, I've gotten a long list of organizations that want to join, that are desperate to join, but they actually do participate in all of our activities, our meetings, our calls, our emails, and briefings and sessions. So they're fully engaging as if they were members, but just that we haven't reopened formal membership at this point. And we'll do that probably around this point, towards October, when we have the final stage of the drafting of the pilot. And the idea is that by the time we get to the GFMD Civil Society Days in Quito in mid-November, we will have this fully rolled out and say, okay, this is what we're going to be. We've done a full process of consultation throughout the year, and that's what we're landed on. Sort of then begin take additional members, already begin, if we have a steering committee, if we have an executive board, already start to look at how we build that. And by January 1st, 2020, we will launch that officially and begin implementing that from January onwards. So at least the first 3 months, I think it'll be very, very active work in terms of kind of building that. So that's the process where we're at. It's a very extensive series of consultation discussions with civil society, especially at the core, but beyond civil society as well with all of you. And we welcome your inputs at any point in time. Feel free to just send us a message. As I mentioned, I also show you that we have this models of engagement, csengagement.org website, and you'll find everything in there. You'll find in the resources, all of the documents that we have, the full report. We'll keep adding and building this as we move along. In early May, we'll have a new set of report that looks much more at the refined objectives and the structure and some comments. And then, we have the roadmap and how you can engage, where we are in the point of engagement. And finally, anytime, anybody is welcome to send feedback, comments, anything, of questions through this box here. And at any point, myself, Clara, especially from Secretary, we welcome your comments at any point in time, as well as anybody else. So feel free to share this widely as possible for anybody to look at. And let me pause there and see if there's any questions about where we are in the process and the roadmap and where we're moving towards, and see if there are any comments on that. And let me also ask Clara, my colleague within the Secretary, if Clara, do you have any comments and additional things to add to this, as well as my other colleagues in ICMC, Stefan and Madeline, if you also have any other comments from your side as well.
No, thank you, Colin. I think that was really clear, and as Colin said, you can find everything on our website at any time, and don't hesitate to write to us. We're very happy to receive your comments, questions, thoughts. So please just reach out. Thanks.
No, nothing on my end, Colin. Very comprehensive. Thank you, and thanks to all of our listeners who joined in.
Yeah, thank you from my part, Stefan, from ICMC. Thank you to all again, and thank you to Colin for, I believe, a very, very good presentation.
Yeah, thank you. And any other questions or comments at this point? Very good. then again, we want to thank you all for joining us today. And we welcome again your inputs at any point about this process and how we can be evolving as civil societies, coordination and facilitation, and partners to you in your ongoing work, and how we can be best positioned to do that and be the best partners possible. So feel free to always let us know, and feel free to reach out at any point in time. Thank you again, and we'll be in touch. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.